So what you said here is a very subtle nuance. In fact, God created humans for eternal paradise, and in order for us to become worthy of it, He shapes us in this world, so to speak, like dough, molding us into a state fit for paradise. But it is by their own will that people go to hell.
Well, would it have any meaning to be there without knowing what eternal happiness is?
Of course it wouldn't.
So it means we also need some preparation. We already mentioned in our previous answer that paradise is not cheap. We have come here to earn it, to prepare for that eternal life. In fact, if we question this in our own choices, we will see the answer. Even in our own lives, we always choose life over death. Why does a person ask this question instead of ending their life? The very existence of this question actually shows a desire to choose life. In other words, despite everything, they choose to live. Let's divide it into two options. If a person believes in God, their choice to live is proof that they prefer life, and because they believe, they also believe in an eternal life. Because God has infinite wisdom and infinite knowledge, the person has shown submission to Him and chosen to live. If they do not believe, their choice to live is proof that they prefer existence over non-existence. Because for them, death is a state of non-existence. Therefore, they could end their life and go to eternal non-existence, but they choose to live. In other words, if a person believes in God, they do not and cannot ask this question, because they did not create themselves and are the work of a God with infinite wisdom. They know that trusting in His infinite wisdom, they have come to prepare for an eternal life. In other words, they have no right of disposal. By believing in God, they have submitted to God's infinite wisdom. God has chosen eternal happiness for them on their behalf. At this point, let us not be misled by the fact that some people commit suicide. They are not actually comparing life and non-existence and choosing non-existence. Generally, they commit suicide because the test of life feels too heavy for them because they cannot pass the test. Moreover, because they do not draw strength or power from faith, they become helpless. Because human beings were created for prayer, they were created weak. By attributing themselves to an owner of infinite power and praying to Him, they can remain standing. Since they cannot find this attribution, the test of life feels too heavy for them, and generally that is why they commit suicide. Otherwise, they are not committing suicide as a choice between existence and non-existence. Let this point not mislead us. Let us state this as a side note. In other words, for a beautiful work of art to say to its artist, "Why didn't you ask me before creating or making me?" is the ultimate expression of irrationality.